The ocean doesn't forgive. Out on the edge of the continent, where crushing waves meet impenetrable darkness, duty turned to madness. We're counting down the 15 cursed Australian light stations still plagued by unexplained fires, haunting screams, and the perpetual cold dread of the deep. Cape Otway Lighthouse, Victoria. The air at Cape Otway is thick with salt and the cold memory of tragedy. Standing sentinel above the perilous confluence of the Southern Ocean and Bass Strait, the historic lighthouse beam cuts a lonely swathe through the deepest Australian night. This stretch of Victorian coastline, notoriously known as the Shipwreck Coast, demanded the tower's construction in 1848. A silent monument to the hundreds lost before the guiding light was installed. There is an inescapable sense that the massive structure does not just ward off disaster, it permanently contains it. The most frequent and unsettling manifestations center on the original keeper's cottage. Visitors and staff alike report feeling a crushing weight of sorrow, particularly near the small, unmarked burial ground adjacent to the property. Local legends tell of Kara, a young Aboriginal woman whose deep despair lingered after her own people were displaced by the colonial settlement. Her cold, phantom touch is occasionally felt on the shoulders of those pausing near the cottage threshold, an unsettling brush against the living that leaves the air immediately chilled. More concretely disturbing are the occurrences within the tower itself. Even after full refurbishment, the distinct smell of stale pipe tobacco sometimes permeates the narrow staircase, followed by the heavy, rhythmic tread of unseen boots ascending to the lantern room. It is widely said to be the spectral remnant of an early keeper, endlessly checking the oil reservoirs and mechanism. On windless nights, when the lighthouse is empty save for the automatic rotation, the distant, faint sound of a woman humming a sorrowful, ancient melody drifts up from the base, echoing off the iron stairs before suddenly dissolving into silence. These manifestations suggest that duty, once undertaken in such a desolate and dangerous place, can become an eternal, binding affliction. The light continues to turn, casting its essential safety across the water. But those who stay overnight understand the terrible truth. The original keepers of Cape Otway have never truly left their posts, and in the enduring darkness, they remain inextricably bound to the land and the ocean's consuming sorrow. 2. Split Point Lighthouse, Victoria. The wind off Bass Strait howls a sustained, melancholy note against the weathered stone of Split Point Lighthouse, a sound that carries the chill of deep water and forgotten cries. Even on a clear day in Aries Inlet, a palpable gloom clings to the tower's dizzying spiral, a remnant of its long, turbulent watch over the treacherous Victorian coast. Keepers have always spoken of an unnerving pressure at the highest landing, a feeling less like vertigo and more like the crowded proximity of an unseen presence. Dors Tirus, the true source of this lingering horror, is tied to the tragedy of 1891. That year, the head keeper's young daughter, Eliza, was found missing after a fierce summer squall struck the shore. While the official record attributes her disappearance to the rough seas, local lore persists that Eliza, terrified of the blinding, rhythmic pulse of the lantern, climbed to the lamp room during the storm only to be intercepted by a figure of pure shadow. A disgruntled former assistant keeper, dismissed for erratic behavior, who had sworn to reclaim his post. It is said he didn't leave the tower after his firing. He simply faded into its cold masonry. Today, the hauntings manifest with unsettling regularity. Visitors often report a fleeting, small hand brushing the backs of their necks on the spiral staircase, accompanied by the distinct smell of salt and old linen, which was Eliza's favorite dress material. More disturbingly, keepers on night watch have documented sophisticated acts of sabotage. The meticulous unwinding of the clockwork mechanism, the sudden, unexplainable extinguishing of the modern electric lamp, and the faint, wet sound of a child sobbing emanating directly from the lens itself. The terror peaks when the sea mist rolls in, shrouding the tower in blinding white. When this happens, witnesses claim to see not the electric lamp's steady beam, but a brief, incandescent flash of oil fire, the archaic light of 1891, followed by a frantic, rhythmic tapping from within the thick glass. It is the sound of a small, desperate soul trapped between the light she feared and the eternal darkness she now embodies, forever tapping against the barrier separating her cold world from ours. Three, Matsuyker Island Lighthouse, Tasmania. The gale force winds that ceaselessly pummel Matsuyker Island carry the thin, mournful shriek of the deep Antarctic South, a sound indistinguishable, sometimes from human misery. This rocky outcrop, the southernmost point of Tasmania, hosted a vital but desolate lighthouse from 1891 until its automation. For the keepers and their families, the isolation was a form of slow, psychological torture, breeding a grim history perfectly suited for residual anguish. Among the many tragedies tied to the station, the most persistent legend concerns a specific keeper, afflicted by the crushing loneliness, who took his own life on the island. The details are murky. Some say he drowned himself off the treacherous western shelf, others that he simply vanished during a severe storm. But the subsequent sightings and auditory phenomena center firmly on the original, imposing white tower. Keepers who served in the decades following the incident began reporting anomalies that defied the structural noise of the light mechanism. The most famous and terrifying manifestations involved the lantern room itself and the spiral staircase leading up to it. Witnesses, often alone during the night watch, have described hearing heavy, deliberate footsteps ascending the iron stairs, the sound stopping just outside the thick glass of the lantern room door. When the door is wrenched open, there is only the blinding rotation of the lamp and the empty space beyond. On clear nights, maintenance workers have occasionally glimpsed a fleeting shadow passing the circular catwalk railing, a tall, gaunt figure perpetually watching the dark, endless ocean that swallowed him whole. Even today, long after the last resident keeper left the lonely island, the automated beacon seems to struggle, occasionally flickering or going out briefly, only to snap back to life. The chilling conclusion accepted by those who know the island's secrets is that the tormented keeper remains bound to his watch, his spectral duty the only thing anchoring him to the land, forever turning the light on an ocean that offers no forgiveness. Four, Point Hicks Lighthouse, Victoria. The Point Hicks Lighthouse, carved into the jagged eastern tip of Victoria, is a towering monument to isolation. The fierce wind is a constant, grinding whisper against the tower's stark white paint, carrying with it the undeniable scent of salt and relentless decay. It is a place where the barrier between the living and the cruel history of the sea feels perilously thin. Even on the clearest day, an oppressive dread settles over the compound, a chilling acknowledgement of the tragedies this beam has witnessed since its erection in 1890. Standing resolute above the churning Tasman Sea, locals and maritime historians maintain that the inherent isolation of the Cape bred madness as often as it ensured safety. The most persistent, documented presence is linked to an unnamed assistant keeper from the early 1900s, driven by the suffocating monotony and the perpetual sound of the massive foghorn. The man allegedly fell or perhaps threw himself from the steep, winding iron staircase, his body found shattered at the base of the tower. This overwhelming despair left an imprint deeper than any physical stain. His sorrowful duty is now woven irrevocably into the very structure of the light. Operational staff who have endured stints at Point Hicks frequently report anomalous activity that defies modern explanation. A heavy, labored breathing is often heard ascending the spiral stairs in the dead of night, followed by the sound of keys rattling against the railing. Despite the tower being secured and empty, perhaps the most disconcerting sign is the faint but distinct aroma of strong, stale pipe tobacco that sometimes saturates the lantern room air, an antiquated, pungent brand that no modern keeper would smoke minutes before the beam suffers a momentary, inexplicable power failure or flicker, even in high winds. They say the dead assistant keeper never truly left his post. He remains trapped, caught between the grinding mechanisms of the light he was sworn to operate and the dark, infinite void of the ocean he was meant to warn against. Every sudden cold spot and every shuddering flicker of the lamp is not a navigational warning to ships, but a desperate, shivering sigh from a restless soul still bound to the blinding beam. Five. Wilson's Promontory Lighthouse, Victoria. The southern sweep of Wilson's Promontory, where granite meets the roaring Bass Strait, holds the light station built in 1859, a solitary pillar against the unrelenting sea. To reach it requires a brutal 11-mile trek, and the isolation has always been the lighthouse keeper's true enemy. The old logbooks, brittle and salt-stained, speak less of storms and more of the quiet madness that set in, especially after the tragedy of 1907, when assistant keeper James O'Connell vanished. His shift ended at midnight. The lamp remained burning, but the man had simply evaporated from the locked tower, leaving only the faint, metallic scent of brine and ozone behind it. The official report concluded a sudden fall from the lantern balcony, a body swept instantly away by the current. But generations of subsequent keepers reported a far more spectral explanation. During the long, starless nights, when the rhythmic pulse of the lens is the only sound, they hear a thin, scratching sound emanating from the brass mechanism of the clockwork drive. It sounds less like friction and more like fingernails dragging across the metal casing, trying desperately to halt the slow, relentless turning of time itself. The most unnerving manifestation occurs specifically during the dead hour. Just before dawn, staff who now maintain the automated light have documented instances where the entire tower, otherwise silent, momentarily drops several degrees in temperature. In this sudden chill, the pressure equalization valve on the hydraulic pump often cycles, creating a sharp, echoing hiss as if someone has taken a deep, desperate breath directly behind the observer. No steam, no logical cause, just the sound of a man who hasn't been able to draw air for over a century. It is said that O'Connell never escaped the prom. He didn't fall into the sea. He remains trapped within the powerful beam he tended, desperate for the moment the light shifts away so he can finally cross the cold expanse of the lantern room. On certain moonless nights, visitors sleeping in the old cottages report a brief, icy shadow cast across the wall, racing against the slow revolution of the light, perpetually caught between salvation and the suffocating dark. 6. Cape Schanck Lighthouse, Victoria. The Cape Schanck Light Station stands on ancient volcanic rock, a resolute sentinel against the punishing Southern Ocean since 1859. Its thick basalt geometry speaks of Victorian endurance, but the deep silence of the cliffs speaks of the profound loneliness that defined the early keepers. Perched at the remote extremity of the Mornington Peninsula, the wind here does not just howl. It carries the residual echoes of those isolated lives, trapped between the granite tower and the unrelenting expanse of the Bass Strait. The most persistent spectral narrative concerns an assistant lightkeeper from the early 20th century. Though his name remains vaguely documented, his presence is reportedly undeniable. Driven to distraction by the profound solitude and the ceaseless, hypnotic rhythm of the revolving light, the man tragically ended his own life within the compound's walls. While official records are often sanitized, those who have maintained the property in recent decades swear that the key to the main engine room belonged to him, a heavy brass relic that he continues to carry. Visitors and maintenance staff frequently report anomalous activity centered precisely on the original engine house and the narrow spiral staircase of the tower distinct. Heavy footsteps ascend the iron treads when the structure is known to be empty, and tools disappear from locked cabinets only to reappear in impossible, often dangerous locations. The most disturbing manifestation is the sudden, visceral chill that blankets specific corridors, often accompanied by the faint, metallic jingle of that old brass key, a sound that precedes the sensation of an unseen presence watching from the deeper shadows of the compound. The spectral keeper appears bound not to his death, but to his shift. He seeks no communion, only completion of his duty. Even now, decades after his physical death, when the power occasionally sputters or the automatic systems inexplicably fail, caretakers quietly acknowledge the chilling theory. The man in the engine room is still desperately trying to switch the light back on, eternally performing the exhausting task that ultimately destroyed him. Seven, Cape Wickham Lighthouse, Tasmania, King Island. The wind at Cape Wickham never truly rests, a sawing shriek amplified by the sheer height of the stone tower. This, the tallest lighthouse in the southern hemisphere, stands guard over King Island, a brutal sentinel on the edge of the Bass Strait. A sea that claims ships indiscriminately and refuses to relinquish its dead. The structure's remote isolation is not merely geographical, it is spiritual, a place where the barrier between the living watchman and the unforgiving deep is perilously thin, creating a constant confluence of salt spray and residual fear. King Island's surrounding waters earned the chilling moniker, the graveyard of ships, littered with the remains of hundreds of vessels dragged down by unforgiving reefs, lives extinguished just shy of safety. It is widely theorized that the light, while meant to guide the living, acts as a homing beacon for the lost souls who haunt the tower itself. Keepers over the decades have consistently reported a spectral manifestation, the distinct, measured sound of heavy, waterlogged footsteps slowly ascending the narrow granite spiral. These steps are never accompanied by a visible entity. They simply grind upward, echoing a desperate and eternal climb that never reaches the summit. The manifestations are profoundly sorrowful, rarely violent, yet terrifying in their pervasive presence. The worst documented events involve rapid, localized temperature plunges in the living quarters, often accompanied by the faint, metallic scent of brine and decaying rope, a smell clinging to the air long after the cold recedes. One keeper logged an account of waking to find his bedclothes saturated in a patch of intensely cold, salt-laden water, as if something soaked and heavy had briefly paused beside him in the dark. The drowned souls seek the solace of the light, but finding only the grinding mechanism and the lonely keeper, they settle to wait, forever tracked by the ceaseless rotation of the beam that failed to save them. 8. Goose Island Lighthouse, Tasmania. The air surrounding Goose Island Lighthouse, off the northeast coast of Tasmania, always carried a brine-laced chill far deeper than the roaring 40s warranted. It was a place defined by granite and isolation, built to defy the unpredictable Bass Strait, yet ultimately defined by the souls it could not save. The light, installed in 1846, has cycled through generations of keepers, each leaving their mark. But one in particular, Keeper Alistair Finch, left a stain of dread that never faded. Finch arrived in 1881, a man already hollowed by personal tragedy, seeking solace in the sentinel's duty. Records indicate a rapid deterioration of his mental state, fueled by the relentless wind and the incessant cry of the seabirds, which he claimed were not birds at all, but the mocking whistles of drowned sailors. His final log entry, dated October 12th, was a single, sprawling sentence describing faces pressed against the glass, eyes wide with the deep cold, demanding silence. Finch vanished the next morning, leaving behind only his polished brass telescope and the pervasive scent of ozone and something metallic, like old blood. The specific hauntings began immediately after the replacement keeper arrived. It is not Alistair Finch who remains, but the chilling presence he invited in. Keepers report being woken by the sound of rhythmic, hollow rapping against the lantern room's heavy glass, always 3 precise knocks, mimicking a rescue signal. If a keeper acknowledges the sound or approaches the window, the temperature inside the tower plummets violently, and the light temporarily dims, bathing the circular room in a suffocating, ancient darkness. The most unnerving manifestation occurs on still nights when the sea is unnaturally calm. Visitors have reported hearing deep, wet sighs echoing from the granite base of the tower, accompanied by the distinct feeling of being watched from below the waterline. The entities Alistair Finch described are still pressing themselves against the foundation, their faces frozen in the final moments of their long drowning. The light still turns, a comforting beacon, yet it is merely a rotating mirror reflecting the silent, endless watch of the Goose Island dead. 9. Barrenjoey Lighthouse, New South Wales. The Barrenjoey headland is a stark, exposed monolith jutting into the Tasman Sea, crowned by its iconic sandstone lighthouse. The atmosphere here is one of relentless wind and profound isolation, conditions perfectly conducive to the fracturing of the human mind. While the light serves as a vital navigational aid, the structure itself has become a repository for the psychological wreckage of those tasked with its keeping, specifically the disappearance of keeper Silas Bales in 1892. Bales was known for his stringent adherence to duty and his crippling loneliness. Official reports stated he was swept from the platform during an unprecedented squall, but the internal logbook, found later, contained cryptic entries detailing a persistent, non-physical pressure inside the lantern room, a cold, dense presence that seemed to demand all of his attention. Local fishing lore suggests Bales didn't fall. He became obsessed with the light itself, convinced his duty was not to warn ships away, but to absorb the light's power and become part of the structure forever. Those who maintain the heritage site today report disturbances that defy meteorological or structural explanation. The most common phenomenon is the unnerving scent of heavy lamp oil and burnt wicks emanating from the upper levels. Even though the tower has been electrified for decades, visitors and rangers have consistently noted a sudden, violent drop in temperature upon entering the service room, accompanied by the distinct sound of a heavy brass crank being turned, a noise associated with the massive clockwork mechanism Bales would have maintained. The haunting climaxes within the lantern room. On the darkest nights, the modern optical system will momentarily dim, casting long, erratic shadows across the interior glass. Just before the light corrects itself, witnesses have heard a faint, desperate scratching noise, sounding like fingernails scraping against the interior of the sandstone walls, the final, frantic attempt of Keeper Bales to intensify his eternal vigil, permanently trapped between the ancient stone and the endless void of the Pacific. Then, Tasman Island Lighthouse, Tasmania. Tasman Island is a geographic anomaly, a sheer, vertical plug of rock thrusting out of the Southern Ocean, permanently lashed by the gale force winds known as the Roaring Forties. Its lighthouse, operational since 1906, was never merely a structure. It was a penitentiary of isolation designed to save ships from the treacherous Tasman Peninsula currents. The psychological strain on the keepers was legendary, driven by the impossibility of their circumstances. Weeks of unbroken fog, the constant, deafening roar of the waves 800 feet below, and the crushing knowledge that help was always impossibly distant. This perpetual, anxious energy soaked into the very mortar of the compound, breeding specific and persistent residual hauntings tied inextricably to duty and failure. The harshest aspect of island life was the maintenance of the steep supply tramway, which ran almost vertically down the cliff face. In 1937, Principal keeper Arthur Giles was tasked with repairing the critical brake gear on the tram's lower section. A sudden cable snap resulted in a catastrophic fall, crushing Giles instantly beneath hundreds of pounds of brass and iron equipment. Though the official log cited a mechanical failure exacerbated by salt corrosion, former keepers whisper that Giles, exhausted and hallucinating from isolation, simply slipped. Today, those few researchers and maintenance personnel permitted access report a pervasive smell of cold brass and heavy oil that lingers near the tramway winch house, even decades after the machinery was removed. The haunting is acoustic and specific. Late at night, when the beam sweeps the compound, the air is briefly filled with the shuddering sound of the tramway cable tightening violently, followed by the metallic screech of the brake mechanism failing in the final, heavy impact below the clifftop. This sound signature, a documentation of Arthur Giles's last fatal moment of service, is said to repeat cyclically. The tragedy is not that a man died performing his duty, but that the island's elemental hostility has trapped his failed effort in a loop of sound, forcing the lonely lighthouse to forever document the price paid for its continued light. The warning from Tasman Island is not visual, but a recurring, documented noise in the dark. Cape Borda Lighthouse, South Australia, Kangaroo Island. The southern tip of Kangaroo Island is perpetually lashed by the relentless Southern Ocean, and there, perched atop the jagged cliffs, stands the Cape Borda Lighthouse. Built in 1858, its whitewashed tower faces a sea graveyard. Wrecks cluster beneath the waves, testament to the unforgiving nature of this remote coast. The air carries the scent of salt and eucalyptus, but also, according to those who have kept the light, the faint, cloying sweetness of rot. Isolation breeds paranoia, but at Cape Borda, the dread is earned, not imagined. The official records speak of tragic accidents, keepers swept away, children falling from the precipice. But the local legend centers on a particular incident from the 1880s, the drowning of a young assistant keeper whose body was never recovered. It is said he had recently taken a valuable keepsake, a silver locket, from a sunken vessel he had illegally salvaged. His spirit, bound to the tower by the theft and the sudden violence of his death, remains a possessive and angry entity. The hauntings are specific and tactile. Visitors frequently report a sudden, icy drop in temperature near the original oil room. Even on blistering summer days, maintenance workers have documented persistent, inexplicable water seepage on the spiral staircase, a thick trail that dries the moment it is photographed. But the most terrifying manifestation occurs when the wind is high. A distinct, echoing cough, wet and suffocated, is heard just beneath the lantern room glass, immediately followed by the heavy, rhythmic clatter of keys dropped onto the stone floor. No keys are ever found. The keepers who remain at Cape Borda are accustomed to the spectral presence, treating the cough and the metallic clang as necessary background noise. But sometimes, when the light rotates across the black expanse, they catch a glimpse of the assistant keeper in the beam, a dark silhouette standing motionless by the railing, his outstretched hand clawing toward the sea, perpetually reaching for the stolen silver that damned his eternal watch. Cape Duquetic Lighthouse, South Australia, Kangaroo Island. The wind, a relentless, mournful beast, howled its ancient song around the limestone tower of Cape Duquetic. Perched on Kangaroo Island's perilous southwest point since 1909, the lighthouse was a beacon of salvation. Yet its isolated compound housed decades of untold despair. The rock shelves below were notorious for shattering vessels, and the keepers who manned the remote outpost often fought a losing battle against the encroaching madness of solitude and loss. They knew they were never truly alone, especially in the echoing silence between the foghorn's blasts. The prevailing legend among the later maintenance crews concerns keeper Thomas Rourke, who served during the tumultuous years of the 1930s. Rourke, already broken by the death of his young family back on the mainland, was driven to the edge by the relentless, monotonous churn of the waves and the constant presence of the drowned beneath the cliff face. One winter night, during a violent storm that ripped the roof tiles from the quarters, Rourke vanished. His shift log was found open, detailing a desperate conversation he claimed to be having with the cold watcher, a figure he described as wearing heavy, waterlogged wool, forever dripping salt water onto the floorboards. The haunting manifestations are subtle but persistent. Visitors frequently report a pervasive chill that cannot be explained by the sea breeze, centered primarily on the winding iron staircase leading to the lamp room. Staff tasked with cleaning the keeper's quarters have logged numerous instances of footprints appearing on the polished timber floors immediately after they have been mopped. Despite the building remaining locked and empty, these prints are always wet, heavy, and disproportionately large, tracking from the master bedroom directly towards the external door facing the treacherous cliffs. But the most terrifying incident occurred in 1988, just before automation. A relief keeper, sleeping in Rourke's old room, awoke to the sound of raspy breathing at the foot of his bed. He watched, frozen by fear, as a dark, sodden shape slowly slumped onto the chair. It made no sound, offered no threat, but simply watched him with eyes that glowed faintly, reflecting the revolving lamp beam. The keeper fled at dawn, leaving a note that spoke only of the unbearable weight of salt water and the chilling realization that some keepers never leave their post, even when the sea finally claims them. Shersan, Cliffy Island Lighthouse, Victoria. The southern ocean batters the granite base of Cliffy Island, a desolate sentinel guarding the treacherous waters off Victoria's coast. Here stands the unmanned lighthouse, a stark, white cylinder perpetually damp with sea spray and cloaked in an unsettling silence that only amplifies the roar of the waves. It is an architecture of profound isolation, rooted in the loneliness that historically plagued its earliest residents. The operational records, meticulous as they are, contain recurring footnotes detailing unexplained operational failures and rapid staff turnover, hinting at an atmosphere far colder than the Antarctic current that sweeps past its foundations. The haunting traces directly back to 1898 and the tragic tenure of headkeeper Marcus Thorne following a horrific winter storm that claimed both a passing steamer and Thorne's young assistant, whose body was never recovered from the churning froth. Thorne descended into a profound, guilt-ridden mania. He was removed and institutionalized, yet the light station's subsequent logs confirmed the tragedy did not leave with him. Succeeding keepers consistently noted a pervasive odor of ozone and salt localized within the lantern room, often accompanied by the distinct sound of heavy, waterlogged boots ascending the 176-step iron spiral staircase. Long after the station had been completely automated, modern maintenance crews report intense thermal drops focused entirely within the headkeeper's former quarters, a phenomenon dismissed until an engineer verified that the heavy rotating mechanism frequently stalls or attempts to reverse its rotation during high winds. Despite clear mechanical health, most disturbing are the reports concerning the fog signal. During clear nights, without warning or triggering, the massive diaphragm horn occasionally emits a single, mournful blast of sound. The automatic system is specifically programmed to suppress during stable conditions. Local mariners maintain that these unauthorized blasts are the lingering echo of Thorne, forever signaling desperation and attempting to warn vessels of the catastrophe he could not prevent over a century ago. Cliffy Island remains perpetually vigilant, haunted by the specter of a duty that became a sentence. Lowhead Lighthouse, Tasmania. The wind at Lowhead, where the Tamar River meets the Bass Strait, doesn't just howl, it carries the salt-laced groans of a century of drowned men. The oldest continually operating pilot station in Australia, the Lighthouse Complex stands stark white against the churning gray ocean. A beautiful, isolated sentinel steeped in inescapable maritime tragedy. It is a place where the light guides the living, but the shadows are reserved for the dead. The Keeper's Cottage, built in 1888, holds the densest pockets of cold. The most commonly reported apparition is that of a former head keeper, George, a diligent man who served faithfully, but whose loyalty seems to have tethered his spirit irrevocably to the granite tower. He is not a malevolent ghost, but a presence defined by endless, mournful duty. Visitors speak of feeling a pressure on the spine while climbing the narrow spiral staircase, or hearing the distinct, rhythmic polishing sound coming from the brass fixtures work that ceased decades ago. The air around the mechanism often smells faintly of kerosene and pipe tobacco, scents that cling to the past like barnacles to a hull. The specific, chilling incidents always occur just before dawn. A caretaker once found a perfect circle of water, freshly mopped and still damp, in the center of the tiled kitchen floor, despite the building being locked and empty all night. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, often cross the floorboards of the empty upstairs bedroom, the sound terminating abruptly at the doorway to the main tower, as if the keeper has finished his rounds and gone to check the lamp for the morning watch. But perhaps the darkest lingering legend concerns the light itself. During a recent electrical storm, while the modern beacon was completely inert due to a surge, witnesses offshore claimed to see a dim, perfectly timed flash emanating from the old lens chamber. For a moment, suspended between the chaos of the storm and the silent black of the sea, the ghost of Lowhead's light guided them safely into the river mouth, a spectral duty performed by a keeper who refuses to rest. South Solitary Island Lighthouse, New South Wales. The South Solitary Island Lighthouse, a stark pillar against the tumultuous Pacific, was never truly alone. The isolation felt by keepers stationed a dozen miles off Coffs Harbour was only compounded by the spectral company said to patrol the lonely rock, wind-whipped and wave-battered. The granite island held an oppressive silence that even the gulls feared to break after dusk. The air itself seemed heavy with the history of hardship, sickness, and the relentless mental toll of endless blue horizon. The darkest legend concerns the wife of a principal keeper. Sometime in the 1890s, driven mad by the isolation, the official record stated she perished from natural causes. Yet the keepers who followed whispered of suicide, a leap from the lantern room's narrow balcony into the churning sea below. Since that tragedy, a subtle, cold despair has gripped the living occupants of the quarters. Keepers reported the unmistakable scent of stale lavender in the dry, salty air, often preceding brief, flickering shadows that darted across the periphery of the light beam. The hauntings focus intensely on the winding, iron staircase leading up to the lamp. During the deep hours of the watch, the heavy sound of a woman weeping has been heard echoing from the tower base, only to cease abruptly when investigated. More disturbing are the moments when a keeper, climbing the steps, feels the distinct, icy pressure of a hand on the small of their back, urging them forward, faster than they wish to go, as if someone is determined to push them to the very edge of the light, perhaps mirroring the spectral resident's own desperate final steps. When the light was automated and the last official keeper departed, the ghost of South Solitary was finally left to its uninterrupted vigil. Yet, even today, passing mariners report an anomaly on nights of heavy fog, when the island should be completely obscured. They sometimes glimpse a solitary, dark figure standing motionless on the gallery railing, facing out to sea, perpetually waiting for a ship that will never arrive to rescue her from the endless, suffocating solitude of the rock. That's our countdown of the top 15 haunted lighthouses in Australia. From eerie West End to treacherous Tasman, these isolated beacons hold chilling secrets. If you survived this spooky journey, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into the paranormal. Thanks for watching.